Hello, I'm glad to be with you again tonight to continue our study in the book of Genesis. I'm glad for all of you who are able to participate with us tonight, and hopefully you'll be going over those verses that I gave you. Today we're going into Genesis 13 and 14. Let's see if we can bring up the screen as we begin. Okay, we will be really discussing about the relationship that existed between Abraham and the Canaanites. We write at the beginning where Abraham just was called by God in Genesis 12. This is right after Nimrod started a great rebellion against God. Nimrod, like we say from our last studies, is the total contrary of Abraham. Okay, we want to begin by reminding you that so many times I alluded to the facts that God is inclined to save everyone as long as you are human, as long as you are still redeemable. You must understand that some are not redeemable because there is that point which you go beyond redemption. I mentioned that several times in my videos. Once you can understand these things, then you can really understand what we're talking about. Then you can really research about the Bible and understand what's going on in this war against the devil and our Lord and Savior, our Messiah, who came to redeem mankind, not angels. Okay, as we can see here in Genesis 13, we have two main ideas. The first one is that God, although he wanted to destroy the Canaanites, but there was a close relationship between Abraham in that way, I should say, God's people and the Canaanites. When we see here in Genesis 13, verse 7 tells us that God promised Abraham and his seed the land of Canaan. In other words, he has to dispossess the Canaanites to do that. Verse 15 also mentioned the same thing. There are conditions when God calls his people, when God calls someone, Abraham, or anybody for that matter. When he calls you, there are conditions. And the conditions here is for them to do exactly what God asked, which is not to do the things that the Canaanites are doing. We can see that in Leviticus 18:25 and 28. But just before that, we want to tell you that as you can see by that picture here, I don't know if you can see that picture correctly, because we're not going to take time to zoom on the picture. This is showing you someone who is vomiting. I'm sorry for the expression, but this is exactly how the Bible puts it. Sometimes for God to engrave certain things in our mind, he has to be very explicit. So here according to Leviticus 18, it tells us that the land of Canaan vomited out its inhabitants. In other words, because they have gone so far, they have really provoked God to the point that even the land where they inhabit could not stomach them anymore. The land was actually spewing them out. So God told them, if you look in Leviticus 18 verse 3, it tells you specifically in verses like 28, 25, verse, well, if you want to read the whole thing, read from verse 6 through 23. But it tells you specifically that the land of Canaan couldn't stomach those Canaanites anymore because of what they were doing. Because they were doing exactly what God forbade them to do. And God warned God's people not to imitate the Canaanites. Why? Unless the land would spew them out also. Unless the land would vomit them out also. You can read that in Leviticus 18, 25, 28. So the condition, you can find the condition in Leviticus 18 verse 3. Remember that God was about to give them possession of the land, but he wanted to make sure that they understand that the reason that they hear is not because they are better, but because those who inhabited Canaan, the land of Canaan at this time, which is actually Jerusalem, which is where Palestine, Jerusalem, Israel, to be more correct. Because sometimes when you say Canaan, people don't realize it's the land of Israel. So I'm saying here, so as per God's instruction, Moses gave them all the do nots in order not to be spewed out of the land also. And of course, that's exactly what happened to the Israelites. Because they started going after the way of the heathen, the way of the Canaanites, and there they went. That's why they still in dispersion. They've been scattered throughout the world. They still in some people said diaspora. Okay. Just before we go into that, we only have 3 screens. This is the first screen. Remember what I really want to point out here is that God, although he wanted the destruction of the Canaanites, you'll understand that when God would declare or would decree the destruction, every time you see that in the Bible, this has to do mostly with those that are not redeemable. And this pertains to what the Bible describes as Rephaim, or those that came out of the disobedience of the falling angels, as we discussed the last time. You can watch the video, the previous video. We're not going to spend too much time out of that. But you must understand that God has his reason to want to protect mankind, human. Because I mentioned it several times that redemption can only come through a human. That's why Jesus had to be born as a human being. He had to be incarnated. And that's why the devil was trying by every means to exterminate, if not exterminating God's people, but to at least change them, transform them, turn them into what they call Rephaim. If you want to get the details about that, you can watch the previous video. Okay, now before we go to the second screen, What were those specific instructions that God told his people not to get into this, or else the land will vomit you out? Okay, if you look in Leviticus 18, verse 22, 23, and also verse 21, it told them specifically not to get involved in things such as giving their seed, their babies to Moloch, who happens to be the god of fire, who happened to be Baal, who happened to be the sun god. I mean, it's the same guy, the same spirit, but with different names depending on where you are. Because I went through that before in one of those studies. I'm not going back there again. Please, you got to keep up on with the videos, or else you're not going to understand. Okay, so here we see that God specifically told them not to do after the doing of the Canaanites, because they are giving to Moloch. They giving their seeds to Moloch. They practicing bestiality, which is in Leviticus 18, verse 23. They're also practicing homosexuality. And we say that all the time, that we do not hate people who got involved in that, who got caught into homosexuality. But believe it or not, it's some kind of ritual. It's some kind of magic ritual that used to be practiced in the time, a long time ago, in the time of the Canaanites, which is still being practiced now. It's unbelievable how people think that they can just go and imitate whatever they see other people do, because it's a ritual. If you well, actually, I have a video that I released, which is called "The Sons of Belial." I only have it in French as of now, but I will do my best to release it by the end of this week in English, so you can understand what I mean by the sons of Belial. And they were practicing all these things that that would provoke God, because that kind of ritual was only to bring down or to bring up those spirits, those demon spirits. It's a way to conjure. It's a way to some type of invocation to bring up those spirits. That's what it is. Some people call it magic, like a magic ritual. Okay. At time, God even allowed separation. The second part of Genesis 13 is that God allowed that Lot, who was Abraham's nephew, to be separated from Abraham. You can read that part by yourself, but it happened that now Abraham's servants had a lot of cows, sheep, and Lot also. They were very rich in these kind of possessions, and the land was too small for them, and there was always a lot of pressure between the servant of Lot and the servants of Abraham. So Abraham realized that being brethren, we are not going to fight. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left. And that's exactly what is written in verses 8 and 9 in Genesis 13. And this tells you what we really have in Genesis 13. First, it was that God promised to disinherit those inhabitants, because the land will eventually spew them out. Because God at one point told Abraham, it's okay, because it's not time yet. Because the iniquity of the Amorites you know, the cup is not filled yet. So that's where we are with Abraham. Let's go to the second slide. Okay, there we go. Okay, the second slide, we go more into depth, into Genesis 14 right now, because we're covering 13 and 14. And Genesis 14 is showing you how Abraham mingled with the Canaanites, how God's people had a straight, close relationship with the Canaanites. And you will see, you will understand by the time we get to the last slide, which is the next slide. So Abraham mingled with those Canaanites, and among the Canaanites, you must understand that Nimrod, which is the chapter before that we covered in chapter 11, Nimrod was the first one who bluntly rebelled against God. And Nimrod was the beginning of all those evil demons worship and everything else. So here we see that Abraham in Genesis 14:13, Abraham had alliance with the Amorites. The Amorites. I'm sure that a lot of you heard about Sihon. Some people said Sion. Sihon, I believe, the king of the Amorites. And you had also Og, king of Bashan. Some people say Bashan. It's Bashan. But anyway, if you look in Genesis 14:13, where Abraham had an alliance with the Amorites. In fact, in Genesis 14, there happened to be a battle between some of the people of Shem and Abraham, because of Lot. Remember that Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom where Lot was, and Lot was captured because there was like a battle, 4 kings against 5 kings. The 5 kings, they were that involved Sodom, where Lot was, Gomorrah, and a lot of other places which is not important right now. So here, Abraham, this may be this may sound like a paradox. Why? Because Abraham was fighting on the side of Sodom, where Lot was, and he was going against Elam, who was a son of Shem. Remember, 3 sons Noah had after the flood. We went after the flood already. We went past Genesis 6, which is where it happened, and we told you why it happened, because there was a relationship between those falling angels and the daughters of men. So what I'm saying here, there was a war between those 4 kings, where we have Elam. You can look at the beginning of chapter 14 and read it on your own, but I'm just telling you exactly why Abraham had to fight. And he was fighting on the side of Sodom. And Sodom was there where a lot of people were practicing the same thing that Nimrod came up with. So what I'm saying here, why in the world Abraham would fight on the side of Sodom and Gomorrah, And then, in the process, he fought against the sons of Shem. Remember, Noah had 3 sons: Ham, Shem, and Japheth. So remember, Japheth was really, he went up to the north. He wasn't really involved in all these things. Japheth was almost absent for all these things that have been going on. So what I'm saying here, these stories that were related was mostly a relationship or whatever was happening between the sons of Ham and the son of Shem. You must understand this very now, so you won't get confused as I go further into our lessons. Because the Canaanites who came from Ham, as we can see here in Genesis 10, verse 15 and 16, it reads as follows: Canaan begat Sidon. Sidon is where Jezebel came from. Jezebel was a Canaanite. And Jezebel happened to marry a king of Israel. Now you see how far back these Canaanites, they mingled with with God's people. Abraham was mingling with them, and there were also giants there. And you know, most of the giants, not that you can find giants among the sons of Shem or Japheth, who got involved in the rebellion, because the rebellion was to start having relationship with falling angels. So that's how those giants came about. But you know, mostly Nimrod started everything again. We're talking about after the flood. So here we see that Abraham sided with Sodom because Lot was captured. So what happened? One of those Amorites, one of the sons of Ham, came out of the battle. He escaped. You can see that in Genesis Genesis 14 verse verse 18. Genesis 14 verse 14. Yeah, that's correct. Genesis 14 verse 13. One of those Amorites escaped and told Abraham that they captured Lot. So Abraham took 300 people from his household, prayed to the Lord, and went and defeated 5 kings. So that's how he delivered not only Lot, but he delivered all the other people there, the 5 kings that were captured by those 4 kings. The 4 kings involved mostly the children of Shem, as you can see at the beginning of the chapter. Elam was there, and also Ashur, A-S-S-H-U-R, which is the Assyrian. So here we see here that Lot was delivered through God's intervention through Abraham. And of course, this is also where Abraham gave tithes to Melchizedek. So this was like a big war. That was a big thing here. The second part of Genesis 14 involved where the king of Sodom and all the other guys said, Abraham, since you did that, you freed us from those 4 kings. Why don't you take this, take that? Because you know, that was what we call spoil. After you beat up your enemies, you take whatever possession they have. So Abraham said, no, I'm not taking anything from you. just those that they captured, such as Lot, so that you will not say that you made me rich, because Abraham was expecting a lot of promises from God. He didn't want them to say that they helped him and they made him rich. So you can read the chapter by yourself. But the point is like that there was a close relationship between the people of God, that is to say Abraham and the Canaanites. Canaanites involves all those, such as the Amorites, who came to tell Abraham what happened, and also involved the Hittite, Hittite. You all know that Uriah, the Hittite, the one who married Bathsheba, that David took as wife. For those of you who don't know that, these were Canaanites. Canaanites involved the Jebusites, Jebus, which is Jerusalem. That's where the people inhabited, those Jebusites in Jerusalem, because they did not get rid of all these Canaanites because of all their practices that God told them. As a matter of fact, according to Ezra, chapter 9, verse 1, this is what it reads. It says that the people of Israel and the priests, for God's sake, the priests, the Levites, have not separated themselves from the people of the lands of Canaan. They were doing according to their abominations. This is exactly what we went over in the first on the first screen. They were doing according to their abomination, even of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites. Ammonites, remember how the Ammon was born? Moab and Ammon, they were born out of Lot after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. When the two daughters, they trick Lot and have kids with Lot. One of them was Moab and the other one was Ammon. And they were enemies throughout Israel history. And all those Canaanites, they were enemies. But remember I told you at the beginning that although God decreed the destruction of the Canaanites, a lot of the Canaanites, God exalted them. So remember I said that all the time, God is the creator of all. If you repent before you reach the point of no return, that is, because a lot of people think no matter what you do, you can get involved in all this demon worshipping and stuff like that. Once you repent, this is it. But remember, once you get to that point of no return, I refer to this all the time. I said, in the book of Revelation, there is a point of no return. Once you accept the sign, the 666, nobody knows exactly what it is for sure, but some people suggest that it may be something like what Nimrod did. That's what I've explained in Genesis 11. If you want to watch the video, Nimrod got to that point of no return. Because once you start having relationship with those falling angels, you're going beyond redemption. Because God can, it's not that God cannot, but God will not redeem the falling angels. But instead, Jude said in Jude 1 verse 6 that he has them in chain. This is who we're talking about when in Revelation the pit, the mouth of that pit will be released for a little while, and they're going to come out again. They're going to come out of the pit. But God has their destruction already marked. Because everybody knows, although we haven't seen the judgment of God yet, because this is reserved unto the end, the time of judgment. But we all know that one has been judged already. Jesus said it, that the devil was already judged. He was already judged. And Jesus said, I've seen Satan falling down from heaven as lightning. So he has been judged already. So he's gonna be there for his verdict, for his final verdict. But he's been judged. Okay. So here we can see here, although that God decreed the destruction of the Canaanites, God exalted a lot of them, and I'm going to give you a list of them on the very last screen that I'm about to go to in just a matter of minutes. The last thing I want to mention to you before I go to the next screen, remember that there were giants among the Amorites. If you don't believe me, you can read Amos, I believe Amos 2 verse 9, where it is written that God destroyed them before the Israelites. Their heights were like the heights of cedar tree. So you can pull that up, Google that, and see how tall cedar trees are. And he mentioned that they were as strong as oak tree. So we're not talking fable here. We're talking about real things. God, however, knew that the Israelites would go and mingle with those Canaanites. And then God happened to have exalted some of these Canaanites in spite of their rebellion, because God is the creator of all. The only problem with Satan is like he went beyond the point of redemption. Because redemption, one of the major things for redemption is you have to repent and go down on your knees, and exactly what Satan told Jesus in Matthew 4, why don't you worship me? Why don't you concede and let me and tell me that you're worshiping me? I'm the one with all the power, and I'll give you all this. See, this is what it is. So unless he would do like what he asked Jesus to do, there is no redemption. Because we know that at this point here, all those that he's been following, if he would ever do that, it's not going to look too good. But that's it. That would be his only way out. And this is for God to consider. This I cannot even consider. I'm only giving you the word as it is written in the Bible. Okay, so let's go to the last. All right, let's go to the last screen. I just want to make sure I did not skip anything. Okay. Okay, like I said, there was a roll call throughout the Bible. Just like there was a roll call, R-O-L-L, and then C-A-L-L. There was a roll call in Hebrews, the 11th chapter, where the apostle was, I say the apostle because although the book of Hebrews is an anonymous book, but most people realize that those writings are so much similar to the writing of Paul's. You understand that at one point of time, those writing the epistles, their lives were at stake. Maybe at that time when Paul wrote it to the Hebrews, Paul didn't want to identify himself, and I'm not sure if that was before his arrest where they killed him, but a lot of those epistles Paul wrote from jail. So maybe, who knows? I would have to look into the year where he wrote, or where the author wrote the book of Hebrews and tell you more. But I think that should be sufficient. That's not what we're discussing now. As you can see here, God wanted them to be separated from the Canaanites. Do not give your sons and daughters out to them in marriage. Why? Not because they are not supposed to mingle with them just for that, but God has a purpose behind it, because they were pulling God's people out and taking them into demon worship. And once you get into demons worship, there's no telling where it would lead you. It can take you to the point of no return. Just like some of those Canaanites went to the point of no return and their souls were damned. And Nimrod went to the point of no return. You can watch that previous video in Genesis 11, and you can understand about Nimrod. So here, I am reverting to that verse now in Judges 3, verses 5 and 6. It reads, and the children of Israel dwelled, they were living, dwelled among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites. The Hivites, if you can remember the Hivites, those were at the battle of Gibeon, the Gibeonites. Remember those who tricked Israel? They said, look, we don't live around here. We're not Canaanites. So can we come and be friends with you guys? Because they know that God told them not to mingle with those Canaanites because of their participations in demon worshiping and all these things. And they would allure them, they would cause them to lose their soul. So they also knew that God was with the Israelites, and they were beating everybody after their taking of Jericho. So here they were afraid, so they tricked them. So that's why they had Joshua to swear that they're not going to touch them. So Joshua did not destroy them. Joshua made them slaves. So that's why they lived among Israel. So not all of them were destroyed. Remember that the Jebusite, they couldn't totally destroy them. So a lot of Jebusites remain in Jerusalem, not withstanding all those that the children of Israel married, intermarried, just like Ezra mentioned, I think in Ezra 2 that we just read. Okay, so here, in our conclusion, I just want to go over a few of those Canaanites that God really elevated or exalted among the Israelites. I'm not talking about Jezebel. Jezebel was, of course, a Canaanite. He was a Phoenician woman. You remember Phoenicia and Sidon? Zidon, some people said. S-I-D-O-N. Her father was a priest of Baal. His name was Baal. And Jezebel was the one who brought Baal in Israel. Nevertheless, she married Ahab, who was a king of Israel. I'm talking about the northern 10 tribes. So it was pretty bad. I mean, some of those Canaanites really messed up. But nevertheless, for some reason, they were closely interlinked with God's people. with Abraham. In fact, the Abraham's sepulcher that he bought was in the land of the Amorites. That's why all the patriarchs were buried. You can read that in Genesis. I think you can see it in Genesis 23, Genesis 25, Genesis 50, Genesis 49. So this means all of those patriarchs, including Sarah, they were buried there. That was at the time when Canaan was still called Canaan. You must understand. So when people are talking to you, there has been a lot of time where people said, well, Canaan was cursed and all these people, they should be destroyed. Some people would come and say, well, they are all from Canaan. Some people said, well, they are this, they are that. But get the truth from the Bible and then you'll understand. Now, Bathsheba was also a Canaanite woman. He was married to Uriah. And according to 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 3, she was the one who conceived Solomon. She was the one who gave birth to Solomon. And you know the story about Uriah. Uriah was, if you allow me to say, a righteous Canaanite. In fact, David messed him up pretty bad. When David said, well, since Uriah, because when David realized that Bathsheba, Uriah's wife, was pregnant, David sent for Uriah from the battlefield because Uriah was fighting for David. So when he got there, David said, why don't you go home to your wife and have a little good time and then you can go back on the battlefield. But Uriah answered David and said, I cannot do that, Your Honor. I cannot do that, my king, because I have already made a pact with God. I have already promised God that until the victory is won, he's not going to go into anything like that. He's going to remain on the battlefield. So when David realized that he couldn't trick him into going and sleeping with his wife, so he wouldn't be suspicious now, because I'm sure he was on the battlefields for more than 8 months, maybe 9 months over. So there is no way he could have impregnated Bathsheba. So David invited him, and David gave him to drink, hoping that, he will get drunk. So for people who love to drink, that's what happened. If your enemies love to drink, you can always get him through that. But guess what? David was hoping for him to go to his wife, but although he was half drunk, the guy went and slept with the soldiers. So eventually they told David, hey, the guy is not going to his wife to have a good time. So David told them he had to be killed. So that was Uriah. He was a Canaanite or Hittite. So what I'm saying here, in the roll call of those Canaanites, you also find Tamar, T-A-M-A-R. She was a Canaanite. She conceived Phares for Judah. Judah is supposed to be where Jesus, the tribe to produce Jesus, the tribe through whom Jesus would come. So that's exactly how it started. A Canaanite slept with Judah, the great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of Jesus, and you can find that in Jesus' genealogy. So what I'm saying, not all the Canaanites were have passed the point of no return. A lot of them were still human, but in general they had this type of worship, and God wanted to protect his people. So that's why you see certain places, certain areas, certain battles, God would tell them to leave the children and the women alive. But certain areas, he would decree that everybody got to go. And that's what happened with the Amalekites. The Amalekites, we don't want to go into that now, but they were also Canaanites. They did a lot of harm to Israel, especially Haman, who wanted to have Mordecai hung. So he was an Amalekite. Okay, let's go to Rahab. Rahab was a Canaanite. Rahab was also in the line of Jesus, because she, some people said she was a prostitute. She was the one on the wall of Jericho. She was the one the spies spoke to, and the spy told her, look, as long as you put that red scarlet on your door, you're not going to be killed, because we have given instruction to all our soldiers not to touch your house. So remain in your house and make sure you hang that scarlet on your door. This reminds us of the Passover. So that's Rahab, the Canaanite, was delivered, and she married I believe the grandfather of Boaz. Boaz who married Ruth. You guys know about the story of Ruth. So it's all there. So in our conclusion, we can understand why God, speaking through Jeremiah, no, not Jeremiah, through Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 16, when the Israelites now, they were acting exactly like the Canaanites. And God spoke through Ezekiel, and he said in Ezekiel 16, verses 3 and 18, specifically verse 3, when he said, your birth and your nativity is in the land of Canaan. You see how far back it goes with Abraham, you know, just mingling with the Canaanites, which is like I would say over 3,700 years ago, back then. So here, the prophet told them that your birth was in the land of Canaan, your father was an Amorite, and your mother was an Hittite. You can understand who was Solomon's mother. Solomon's mother was definitely a Hittite. She was married to a Hittite. She wasn't among God's people, and but yet God had compassion. God did not allow David to have the first conception when she got pregnant the first time, but God happened to love Solomon, who was born after that. So what I'm saying here, in general, the Canaanites, that we're getting into them right now, into their lands, because that's where Abraham is right now, in the land of Canaan, in chapter 13, chapter 14. So although that a lot of them followed after the steps of Nimrod, they have been involved with giants and fallen angels, but as long as they remain human, there is hope. And as you can see, no wonder God said in Isaiah that if you follow me, if you do my will, I will give you places in the kingdom preferable or more honorable than sons and daughters. May God bless you.
sing it for the kids.